Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to our latest episode of RF Breakthrough. I'm Carli Roth from the Innovative Finance team at the Rockefeller Foundation. Today, we'll be talking about the wildfire crisis in the U.S. and how we can leverage innovative investment solutions to restore landscapes to a healthier and more resilient state. Wildfires in the U.S. are increasing in frequency and severity due to landscape-altering effects of prior fire suppression policies and a changing climate. These life-threatening events damage and devastate local communities, watershed health, and entire ecosystems. We are seeing the impacts of wildfires play out in real time. Hawaii's Maui and Big Island are currently experiencing devastating fires fueled by dry conditions and Hurricane Dora. The Lahaina area has been the hardest hit, with nearly 2,200 acres lost to the fires. And last month, across the U.S., we broke out our N95 masks again to manage poor air quality caused by the Canadian wildfires that have been burning for months. These severe weather events are becoming more common and increasing in intensity due to the climate crisis. This is why I'm thrilled to be joined by our partners at Blue Forest. Blue Forest works to address critical environmental challenges by leveraging financial innovation to create sustainable investment solutions. For example, Blue Forest's flagship product, the Forest Resilience Bond, deploys private capital to finance forest restoration projects on private and public lands that reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfire and enhance landscape resilience. Blue Forest works in partnership with the USDA Forest Service, the World Resources Institute, state agencies, local governments, community groups, and several other stakeholders to overcome the funding gap for forest management. Before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to invite you, our viewers, to join the conversation. Comment below or post using the hashtag RFBreakthrough. Now, our panelists. I'm joined by Luke Carpenter, Investment Strategy Manager, and Kim Seipp, Conservation Finance Research Director from Blue Forest. So, let's get started. Kim, first to you. With severe wildfires increasingly in the headlines, I want to start by discussing how we got here in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having us on today. So I think we're really at a place right now where the wildfire crisis has been elevated, as you said, to a nationwide and global crisis. So how did we get here? When we first started managing forests, we had a legacy of fire suppression policies. And that meant that fire, which is a natural process, was not happening on the landscape. We were putting out fires as soon as they started. And so that lack of fire meant that our forests have become really overstocked, which means there's a lot of fuel for fires to happen and they're more severe. So those policies combined with land use planning and management, where more people are living, are recreating at the wildland urban interface close to and in our forests, plus climate change, which has brought a precipitation whiplash of droughts and other, raining and flooding events, have just created a scenario where our forests are degraded and they're out of their natural state. So that when there is a wildfire, it's severe, it's intense, and it is beyond anything that, we can control and that we're used to, with catastrophic impacts, on the ground for the communities that live near those forests, for the ecosystems, but also far away, as we're seeing now with wildfire smoke traveling hundreds and thousands of miles from where a forest started or fire started.
Thanks, Kim. It's certainly interesting to hear how kind of a fear of fire has led us, unfortunately, to where we are today. So, Luke, I'd love to turn it to you to talk about, where Blue Forest fits into this equation. What is Blue Forest's mission, and how does the model work?
Yeah, thanks, Carli, and great to be joining you today. So Blue Forest is a nonprofit conservation finance project developer and asset manager. And we're dedicated to creating solutions to today's most pressing environmental and climate challenges. And that notably includes the wildfire crisis. And so we are an interdisciplinary team of about 30, with expertise coming from environmental management, scientific and academic research, as well as finance and investing. And really what our model is focused on is bringing new funding sources to environmental restoration and also using finance to accelerate the pace and scale of restoration across not only the US, but beyond. And so what we think about is not only the ends of restoration in terms of accelerating on-the-ground implementation, but also the means. And so for us, that really means starting with communities, of being really involved with the groups that are actually living in the landscapes, working in the landscapes, and dependent upon them, and making sure that they are the groups that are leading these activities, that their voices are amplified. And then also making sure that different groups, particularly groups that have not always been at the table, are not only part of that process, but are in communication with each other and are in dialogue. And by that, I mean everything from community groups, indigenous groups, all the way to utility companies, insurance companies, and Wall Street, finance, and creating the connections that allow really these projects to work and for all of this acceleration to take place.
Okay, Luke, so I'd love to hear a little bit more, on the Forest Resilience Bond. We definitely understand, how this benefits water utilities, infrastructure players, the local communities. Can you tell us what the value proposition is for investors? Why are they excited to participate in this new innovative structure?
Yeah, and we really approach this from a triple bottom line perspective, where fundamentally we are structuring forest resilience bonds, looking at the financial outcomes, right? And understanding that investor participation is key to enable upfront financing. And a lot of the revenue sources, or what's being underwritten as part of the forest resilience bond, is extremely low risk. And so because of that, we're able to really bring down the cost of capital and make investors comfortable with the underlying vehicle itself. And so to date, we've used a lot of blended financing strategies to really maximize the overall impact of market rate capital with capital from program-related investments, other foundations, and impact investors who are more focused on the impact outcomes. And that's really the other pillar of return to investors is hard quantified impact outcomes across water, climate, fire risk reduction, community benefits, and really tying those together. And so that project success from an implementation standpoint both generates financial return, but also fulfills all of the impact expectations and really potential of the vehicle.
Thanks for that. And I know your annual impact report does a fantastic job of explaining kind of those impact outcomes as well, which for us at Rockefeller as an investor in the first Forest Resilience Bond, we're always so thrilled to see how that impact is progressing on the ground. So Kim, maybe I'll turn it back to you to share a little bit more as we think about forest resilience, ecosystem health. What are all of these multiple benefits to the communities that Luke mentioned that we should be aware of? And how do you think about both quantifying those and communicating those to the communities, to your stakeholders?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Luke emphasized, so much of the work that we do is with communities and it's with partners. And that's because there are so many different groups, local groups, but even beyond local groups, that are really connected deeply to forests. And so a few examples of this. One is we think about water supply. So the majority of our water supply, especially in the West, comes from forests. And so if there's a catastrophic wildfire, that means that a water supply for an entire downstream city, perhaps even a region, is degraded. And so protecting that water supply is of high importance to that water utility. And so they really have a stake in restoring the forest. And when I say restore the forest, I'm talking about getting the forest back into a state that it was before all of these legacy fire suppression policies went into effect. Of course, it's not going to be the same given the climate change and just the era we're living in. But we really want to make those forests healthy to protect, for example, water supply. There's also infrastructure owners have a big stake in forests. As we all know, many power lines run through forests. And so if there's a fire, infrastructure can be damaged, or sometimes infrastructure owners create the fires themselves. And if the fire is unhealthy and degraded and overstocked, that fire can go from a small fire to a really catastrophic wildfire with catastrophic impacts. Then there are some of the benefits we might not think about as much or be familiar with. Forests are a really big part of recreation in America and in the world today. We all go to the forest to recreate. We have a sense of place about those forests, and that's really meaningful. There's also groups that are interested in biodiversity. And so how can we create healthy forests to protect those? So when we think about at Blue Forest, we think about all of these different benefits. We work with land managers to think about different projects and assess all of the potential benefits. Then we work really with the groups that benefit on assessing the value of a really resilient forest with them. So say there was a water utility we're working with. We would never go to the water utility and say, this project brings this much value to you. You should, cost share this project this much. We really take an iterative and collaborative approach to valuing benefits with scientific models and economic analyses.
Perfect. So, Kim, you mentioned cost sharing, and that's obviously a key component of the Forest Resilience Bond at the Rockefeller Foundation. We're an investor in that bond. I've been so excited to see how that has grown and scaled and had such great traction so far. Luke, could you tell us a little bit more about what the Forest Resilience Bond is, how it works, who are the partners on that, and what your ambitions are for your Forest Resilience Bond?
Yeah. So as Kim was saying, the Forest Resilience Bond is an innovative debt financing mechanism for forest restoration projects on public lands. And the FRB acts as a cost share mechanism, and that unlocks financial commitments and then enables upfront financing by private capital for that work to be completed. And so Blue Forest connects new funding sources to forest restoration projects by quantifying the multiple benefits of forest restoration. As Kim said, that could be recreation, it could be water quantity and quality, reduced fire risk, biodiversity conservation. Every acre of treatment has a variety of different values. And there are different beneficiaries really that get value from those outcomes. And so we engage those beneficiaries, we help them understand that value, work with them collaboratively to do so, and then allow them to share in the cost. So it's not just one group fronting all of that cost, but paying a portion of it. And so together, because there are different beneficiaries that all see those benefits and they're non-competitive benefits, they can share that cost together and allow project financing to happen in an accelerated way. And the partners we typically work with for a given FRB, it really starts with the land manager. So on public lands, that typically is federal partners like the USDA Forest Service and also the NRCS, BLM, and then also it can be at the state level, say Oregon Department of Forestry, for example, and really working with them to understand what are their on-the-ground needs and priorities for restoration and for management. And then starting from there, also working with community groups, often forest collaboratives, groups that are on the ground, they really understand what's going on, they're involved directly, they're working in these industries, and their communities are dependent upon forests, upon the water outcomes, fire risk reduction, et cetera. And then other partners that are key are groups like implementation partners. So Blue Forest is never actually the local group performing this restoration. We provide financing to an already existing local group. So in the example of the Yuba project, this was the National Forest Foundation, or NFF. And they're a group that have been working on the landscape for a long time. And so really understanding how they worked and then how we could support them and expand their capacity was key to that. And then another central type of partner in all of this are the beneficiaries. So you can think of these beyond just the state and federal land management entities, but also groups like a water or an electric utility that want to treat the landscape as natural infrastructure. It could be local businesses, corporations that have vested interested in, say, climate outcomes or water outcomes on a particular landscape. Or it could also be an economic beneficiary, say a tourism company that is interested in maintaining recreation on the landscape. And then we also have investor partners, and those are really important. Rockefeller has been a partner really since day one for Blue Forest, not only providing capital to actually enable the forest resilience bonds, but providing a lot of support, helping design them, helping understand really how to develop these innovative financing vehicles and expand the reach of them and bring new groups into conservation finance to enable impact to happen more quickly.
And Luke, I'd love to dig in a little bit further and get some more color on what do those implementation partners like the NFF actually do? What is the type of work and activities they're pursuing on the land, to give our audience a little more context of what that actually looks like, how long it takes?
In all the projects we're working on, they're implementing project activities that have been really based on best available science and then gone through the complete environmental permitting process, both at the federal and state level. And so on the Yuba project, for example, where NFF is working, those are all planned management activities on the landscape that have gone through those processes and are really tailored to that management context, to the environmental conditions on the ground, as well as other factors like elevation and seasonal snowfall, things like that. And so typically these projects start with what's called hazardous fuels removal. And so this is both mechanical and hand thinning of overgrown vegetation. So going through and removing the unhealthy, really small trees and brush on the understory. These are typically called ladder fuels, what allow fire to climb up into the crown of forests and expand into really mega fires. And so by removing what's on the ground, it allows the bigger, healthier trees to continue existing and likely be resilient to future fire events. And then once the hazardous fuels have been removed, a group like NFF will help put fire back on the ground, often working with the land manager. So this can be thought of as prescribed fire, and it oftentimes is really weather dependent. There are small windows that it can actually be done safely, but it's trying to recreate the natural fire regime on the landscape and helping these, really the overall flora and fauna re-experience fire in a way they would have. And so that if there is a future fire event, they are more resilient to that. And then there are also specific types of restoration. So for instance, aspen regeneration, which is a really important species for biodiversity and water retention on the landscape, making sure that that is healthier and in a more natural state, removing invasive species as well is important. And then things like road decommissioning, where a road is no longer needed, or making sure there's water passage through a culvert, and just overall making sure that the man-made infrastructure on that landscape is as integrated as possible in a healthy way for overall management objectives.
And so how should we think about the length of time that any of these projects take on a specific landscape, to put it into kind of context of the broader challenge that we face in the U.S. with respect to our forests?
Yeah, well, this can really vary depending on the landscape, depending on available resources. Oftentimes, a typical project could take 10 plus years, and it would have a lot of uncertainty because it would be funded through timber receipts and would be dependent on a lot of different factors that are out of the control of implementation partners. Through the Forest Resilience Bond, we target accelerating that pace and adding more certainty to it by providing upfront financing and additional funding. And so on the Yuba project, they had been saying at best case scenario would have been 10 plus years, and that'll be complete. The first one will be completed in 4 years. And so that's a really significant acceleration of that. Of course, 4 years is still a notable amount of time given the urgency of wildfire overall and how fast these conditions are changing and deteriorating across the West. And so wherever we can, we're looking to accelerate that, both in terms of timing, but also expanding scale. And so that resilience can be brought today, not tomorrow.
That's fantastic. Obviously, going from 10 plus years to 4 is a huge achievement. Kim, can I turn it back over to you for a minute to talk about, so far we've talked about water utilities, infrastructure players as kind of key beneficiaries in this model. But the community groups are so important as well. So when you talk to, people on the ground, there's obviously a huge, implication on health, livelihoods, probably financial assets for these communities. How do you think about that as well as, communicating with those groups on the ground so that you're all partners?
Yeah, great question. So I think there's a few different aspects to the community engagement piece. One, as Luke was describing, and we always say a million times over, we're not the local partner on the ground. And so we really rely on communities to, they are there, they are on the ground, they know the local history, they know all the players. And so we really like to engage with them and make sure that there's community buy-in for a project. And as our projects, if they're on federal lands, require a permit, people can, comment on how is this project, they can say, I don't agree with it. And then the land manager takes that into account when they make a decision. So we don't do the planning because we're not the local partner, but we definitely take into account community groups. Another big aspect of what we do is communication. And I'll talk specifically about one aspect, and that's wildfire smoke, as well as prescribed burning smoke. So part of forest restoration, a key part is prescribed burning, but that also emits smoke. And so there's a lot of challenges. As Luke mentioned, there's only certain conditions when you can do it, but there can also be kind of some public awareness aspects of prescribed burning and the consequences of intentional fire versus a catastrophic wildfire. We're really seeing the evidence right now that forest restoration and a restored forest, if there's a wildfire, it's a very different fire. It's low to the ground, it's not catastrophic. We're seeing a lot of evidence in the Caldor fire in South Lake Tahoe, where forest restoration saved a whole town, the Bootleg fire in Oregon. But the scientific evidence is just starting to emerge about the smoke trade-offs. The smoke trade-offs to a community near, to a community far, about if there's a prescribed fire versus a catastrophic fire. And prescribed fire has to happen in perpetuity. So while a wildfire resilience project, a restoration project might happen over 5 years, it actually management has to happen in perpetuity. So we like to just, emphasize and work with the community however we can, with the land managers, with policymakers, to emphasize how prescribed burning is really beneficial in the long run.
And so at Blue Forest, you talk about that scientific evidence, building the base to communicate these benefits to all the right stakeholders. How does Blue Forest engage in the science part of this? What are you working on to drive that evidence base forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Blue Forest, we have kind of two aspects of our science team. One is our science team that really works with project partners, with local scientists on project-specific benefit analysis. So we'll work with maybe a local researcher to try to understand, what scientific models exist that will show, for example, a water quantity change if a restoration project happens. And water quantity change, just as an aside, happens because as you remove these small diameter trees that were using water, there can, in some ecosystems, there can be more stream flow, which can benefit downstream communities. So we'll work on this science, this project-specific science, with local beneficiaries, with the water utility, with the local science or research partner, to kind of understand the change. And we use that with all of our forest resilience bond projects. On the other side, at Blue Forest, we do scientific research for what we would think of as kind of frontiers in conservation finance or benefit analyses. And so these are maybe one avenue is benefits that we think could exist, but more research is needed on kind of a broad scale to understand them. And going back to wildfire smoke, we are just about to release with our partners at the California Council on Science and Technology, a report that we've been working on for about 2 years, focused on wildfire smoke and thinking about, is there potential for the health sector to actually be a beneficiary for forest restoration projects? So we both talked to 60 health professionals to understand their perceptions of wildfire smoke, how it's been affecting both the people that they serve, but also their operations, and kind of investigated what could potential motivations and barriers for participation be in forest management. How can we connect the dots between these two? We also tried to understand what is the scientific evidence for the human health trade-offs between prescribed fire and a catastrophic wildfire, so in a restored versus an unrestored forest. And the hope, this is kind of a baseline study, again, kind of a new frontier, but we're really hoping that it will help us understand how the health sector might engage in the future.
Great. Well, we're looking forward to seeing that report when it's released. Sounds like a lot of hard work went into it. Kim, I'd love you to dig in a little bit further. Tell us, we're all intimately familiar with the climate crisis. We see extreme weather events globally, wildfires included, events that are supposed to be 1 in 100 years are happening every year. Can you explain to us a little bit more, how does climate change impact wildfire specifically? And really, how is Blue Forest Model best positioned to address some of those challenges?
Yeah, great question. And I'll start by saying I'm not a climate scientist, so I'll do my best though to answer the question. So one of the things that we're seeing with climate change is a change in precipitation patterns, and something that climate scientists have called precipitation whiplash, where we're going between extreme drought to extreme flood events, for example. So I can talk a little bit about both. One is that with the droughts, it means that, especially in overstocked forests, the trees are more dry and they're not getting the water that they need, so that when they burn hotter and it leads to fires being more catastrophic. On the other hand, this kind of change in precipitation patterns on the wet side, a lot of snow is now falling as rain. And snowpack is really important for a lot of our forests because it makes the surface wet and it kind of acts as a natural reservoir. So it's into the spring and even the summer. So when precipitation is falling as rain instead of snow, it also means that the forests are now in a drier state and they're unable to cope with wildfire in a way that they were historically, for example. So one of the things that this means is that we have an urgency to forest restoration. Taking out the small diameter trees that wouldn't have naturally or historically been there not only prevents wildfires from being catastrophic, but it also means that there's more water for the bigger trees to survive. And so it's really a forest health issue. This also means that doing work at a bigger scale is also critical. So I guess that's where Blue Forest comes in. It's climate change just emphasizes the need for doing the work at a bigger or a faster pace and scale.
So maybe I'll zoom back out a little bit and would like to ask both of you, given how topical wildfires in the U.S. has become, we see it in the headlines daily at this point. Can you talk about a little bit of, what maybe gives you hope with respect to this crisis, and maybe what keeps you up at night on the flip side?
Sure, I can jump in here. I think what keeps me up at night is that there remains imbalance in the overall restoration system. And by this, I mean that we've seen really a generational historic influx of funding, capacity, attention, support, and now even financing commitments from investors to help do this work and to actually get it done and prioritize it. But the existing systems, the workforce, the equipment, the communities, the structures around restoration in general haven't changed, or at least not at the pace they need to. And that remains a significant barrier to implementation. And so I think for all of us at Blue Forest, we're really focused on how do we make sure that all of these resources that are available can actually be used, can be used efficiently, and can go into the right hands and can really be put towards local priorities. And so I think that, that's something that we're all really focused on. We recognize as a real challenge. But I think what gives me hope related to that is that there's a lot of alignment. And finally, for the first time in decades, there's alignment amongst government groups, community groups, the public at large, private sector, public sector, really all of these different stakeholders, beneficiaries, groups that in the past have had different views on wildfire-related issues have come together and recognized the scale of the challenge, and also that solutions will come through really collaboration and through continued partnership. And so we're seeing that be effective, and we're really seeing that move the needle forward. And so I think that's something that Blue Forest is excited to be a part of, and that gives us hope generally and makes us excited to come to work every day. Kim, anything you want to add?
Yeah, thanks, Luke. I completely agree with both what keeps me up at night and what gives me hope. I think one of the challenges is that so many of the communities we work in, they're not only, at the wildland urban interface facing these extreme wildfire danger, but they're also the communities that are often having housing crises, or there's a lot of, they're worried about their transportation infrastructure or other natural hazards that are being compounded by climate change. And so sometimes these communities can be really overwhelmed. And so we're coming with, one solution, and I think it's a really powerful solution, but sometimes it's just overwhelming. So how can we best help these basically frontline communities? On the other hand, like Luke said, there's a lot of alignment and just momentum right now. So I think there's, as wildfire smoke is traveling far from the site of the fire, more and more people are aware. We have this influx of federal funding that is really an exciting opportunity for us to capitalize on and to really get a lot of work done in the forestry space. So it's exciting to see, what we can do in this moment.
Thank you both. I'm hearing, there's real need for systems change to unlock new resources, but, we're moving in the right direction. There's momentum and a lot of alignment between all of the different partners and stakeholders that really need to be thinking about that. So we're certainly excited to see that momentum as well. So as we wrap up, I want to, mention to our audience, we welcome you to participate in this conversation. Please feel free to comment below, or in your post, use the hashtag RF Breakthrough to participate further in this conversation. And to Kim, Luke, as we wrap up, I want to open it up for any final thoughts. First, we've spoken a lot about challenges as well as solutions. If you could leave our audience with any final thoughts around, how they might be able to participate in the solution, what would you leave them with, and where can they learn more about all of the exciting initiatives at Blue Forest today?
Thanks, Carli. And it's been great joining you and the whole Rockefeller team here today. And, I think I'll conclude by emphasizing how interconnected a lot of these seemingly remote climate challenges are. And so whether it's wildfire smoke in Canada affecting people in New York City or snowpack across the Rockies affecting the Colorado River across multiple southwestern states. All of these challenges are interconnected. And that's certainly true with wildfire. And so I would encourage everybody really to think that climate resilience in any part can affect really across the whole nation, populations, quality of life, natural resources, as well as beyond the US as well. And so particularly around wildfire, I think it's important really to be educated and to understand the intersection of climate change with legacy land management practices and how stewardship can actually be really a positive transition in sort of regaining control in the wildfire crisis. And I'll pass it to Kim to add a little bit more about Blue Forest more generally.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. I love your last point. And so if you want to learn more about Blue Forest, our website is blueforest.org. And there you can find a little bit more about some of our active forest resilience bond projects, as well as find our annual impact report that Carli was mentioning, where we kind of go through all of the different metrics and kind of outcomes that we are seeing in our forest resilience bond projects. I'll also plug again our wildfire smoke study, which is coming out in September. I will be sending an email so you can subscribe to our newsletter on the website, and we'll look forward to connecting with people as we can.
Thank you. It's been fantastic to hear your perspective and learn how we can help to restore our forests and broader ecosystems to a healthy state. That's a wrap for this RF Breakthrough. Thank you, Kim and Luke, for sharing your time and insights on this topic. And this is just one of the many ways the Rockefeller Foundation is working with partners to implement climate-forward solutions. To learn more, check out our latest impact report on our website. Thank you again for joining, and have a great day.